Walk a Mile in Their Shoes discusses domestic violence and gender inequality. Some of these themes could be triggering for some listeners. Check the 1-800-RESPECT website at 1800respect.org.au for a list of support services. This podcast was recorded on what always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Well, obviously I was in ICU and hospital for a long time, and I only know now that people couldn't believe that they couldn't actually recognise me in the ICU. It was only my nails that how people knew that it was actually me.
I've never, like, a lot of my friends don't even know. Like, I used to just run up to work each day and yeah, it was shit.
What I'd often do after Mum passed away was, you'd call the phone, sort of hoping that she would pick up.
Welcome to episode 2 of Walk a Mile in Their Shoes, a Carlton Respects podcast. For more information on the Carlton Respects initiative, head to carltonrespects.com.au. And for support, head to 1800respect.org.au. My name's Tarang Chawla. I'm a Carlton Respects ambassador, and I'm also the host of Walk a Mile in Their Shoes, a Carlton Respects podcast. In 2015, my little sister Nikki was murdered by her partner when she was just 23. Her partner took Nikki's life when she tried to leave him. And sadly, what happened to Nikki is all too common. On average, one woman a week is killed by a current or former male partner in Australia. And 1 in 4 women will experience some form of abuse from the age of 15. This episode comes with a content warning. We'll be discussing heavy themes about domestic violence and gender inequality. If you need support, check out 1800respect.org.au. In this episode of Walk a Mile in Their Shoes, we'll be exploring the events that unfortunately brought us all together. For many of our guests, there was nothing particularly unusual about the hours that led up to the tragedy they experienced. As they would do weekly, Luke and Daniel were attending a dinner with their mum and her family, with a small celebration for their auntie who just bought a new house.
So once they separated, we would do a weekly dinner with Mum, which would be every Sunday or Monday, would change often at times. And we would always have it at Nonna's house, which is the house that Mum passed away in. But for this week, we actually had it at our auntie's place, and they just moved into a new house around the corner. So it was like, let's, welcome in the new house. And they were very proud they got this new house, and it was a bit of an upgrade for them. So we're like, perfect, let's go there and, enjoy our weekly dinner together. At that age, me and Daniel were very sociable, had our licenses, so we're driving around doing our own thing. And, that we both left the dinner in Reservoir, and Daniel went on his way home to Taylor's Lakes, where we were living with our father. And I shooted off to see some friends, and then ended up going back to a friend's house, and we're just chilling out, watching a movie and stuff.
Simone was also going about her usual nightly routine. She just arrived home to her children after a busy day at work. Her daughter was cooking dinner, and they had a chat about their days.
And got home at 6 o'clock, and Gab, being 15, would always start cooking dinner. And, obviously I asked them, how's your day? Oh, boring. I always get the same thing.
Simone did have some news to share about her own day. She let her daughter Gab know that she'd ended the 9-month relationship with her new partner.
And I said to them, oh, Mummy ended the relationship today. And Gabby, being 15, she was like my rock, my best friend. And she did this big fist pump, she's like, yes. And Ashlyn said, will he come back, Mummy? And I said, no, when you end your relationship, you go your own ways.
However, the nights for Simone, Daniel and Luke would all soon change.
Daniel called me and he'd be like, oh, have you, I just got home. Do you know where we used to call our dad Papa? He's like, do you know where Papa is? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. I haven't been home yet. Like, where would he be? And I think it was a Monday night, was it? Yeah. So it was a Monday night. Daniel would have got home around, 8 o'clock. Whole house was lit. All the TV was on and
TV
everything.
was blaring out loud, all the lights were on, which was not normal because he'd be cautious to have all lights off or at least the lamps on to look like someone's home, and TVs were off. But yeah, it was just, I had this gut feeling straight away. Something wasn't right.
6:06 and there was a knock at the door, and I could see at the door, because I had a little glass cutout on it, that it was him. And I thought, here I am still teaching the girls life skills and respect. And so, I know I was brought up, if someone comes to you and says hello, you
Greet them
yes,
back. Yeah,
absolutely. So I opened the door and I said, hi, how you going? And he said, can we talk about this? And I thought, I've got to give him the benefit of the doubt because I hadn't spoken to him all day. Yeah. And he said, and he said, can I come in? And I said, yeah, sure. And because the girls were in the kitchen, he said, can we go into your bedroom? And I said, yeah, okay. And so we did. And so I was still in all my corporate gear, and I walked in first and he walked in second, and he shut the door. And that was a warning for the girls because I always kept the doors open.
Did you feel in that moment that something could have been wrong?
No, I did. And do you know what, in you saying that, my feeling safe was that I could actually hear the girls outside the door.
Then Lucas like, did you try and call mum? And I'm like, oh no, I'll try now. And then obviously, she didn't answer too. And then I think it was long after we called our auntie, and my auntie said, oh, funny you called. Yeah, I heard some screaming next door, and she's called us to go and pass and just check it out. So that kind of was a domino effect. And then we all just like, all right, well, we'll drive to the house and just go and check to see if everything's all right. And then it wasn't until we got not far around the corner, it's where my auntie called and said, make sure you don't go to the house, come to our house.
So I can remember him saying to me, why can't we make it work? And I was honest. I said, look, you deserve someone that can give you 110%. I said, I can't. I've got 2 jobs, 3 children. I said, it's not fair on you, And he basically wouldn't take any answer I gave him. Wasn't good enough.
Sped off to go see mum, and Daniel got to the house first, to my auntie's place. So where we just had dinner with mum a couple of hours before. And I just saw the street flooded with cop cars, and I ran, got out of the car and just started running down towards my auntie's house because I just felt like that was quicker than the car for some reason. And I burst through the front door, and everyone was kind of situated on, different pieces of furniture, and, everyone had their head down, and, one person was talking to one police officer and the other one was talking to another. And I walked in and no one really said much to me until, I asked, I said, what's happened? And then, someone told me mum passed away. And it was just in that moment where you don't, it just didn't feel real.
The investigators and detectives don't know if he actually forced me to the ground, but I was on the ground. I don't know whether I tripped in my high heels or whatnot, but next minute I look up and a baseball bat was coming down on me. 6:06 to 6:16, I'd actually endured 45 to 50 hits to the right side of my face with the baseball bat. Well, I don't actually remember any blow to the face.
Of 40 or 50, maybe more, there's not a single one that you remember?
No, not one.
And then that night, obviously he went to the house and got her outside somehow and, killed her in the garage with a knife. So,
Daniel and Luke would have to face this new reality head on in the hours after their mum's death. They wrestled with feelings of guilt, confusion, and doubt swirling through their mind as they sat at the Reservoir Police Station until the early hours of the next day.
It was a weird night because, we kind of premeditated something happen from calling him and then calling mum. So the whole thing of could we have done something to prevent this that night? Or, you start having a bit of guilt and stuff like that. And then, going to the police station after it in Reservoir and, we all got interviewed separately. And
We were there till like 6 in the morning.
6 in the morning, and they took all the clothes that we were wearing off because of DNA evidence and questioning us where we were that night. So I felt like I maybe was like involved or something like that, which was really weird because, you know, everyone's a suspect at that stage. And yeah, it was just like you're sitting, you know, 4 in the morning, you know, crying your soul out, and you're wearing, you know, a jumpsuit, and you're just like, how the fuck did I get in? How are we in this situation right now? Like, how do we get to this? And, you know, yeah, and when do I wake? And what's life going to look like from this moment forward? I think that was the scariest part, was just like, how am I going to get through this? Like, it just seemed like, oh, this is too much. Like, this is way too much for me.
Yeah. Well, they pretty much lost both parents that night. So, yeah, it was very challenging for me and Luke, and obviously our family. And still to this day, you know, we're just trying to take each day as it comes. You know, we're still healing. I don't think we'll ever, you know, go a day without thinking about her. But yeah, it's just unfortunate that night we've lost both parents, and now, you know, we don't have contact with either of them. One of the biggest, life-changing moments where I just lost all feelings for him. I have no, like, remorse at all for him at all. And he's destroyed, like, two families, really. Or for what, really? Just, like, it's just...
Could have just moved on and lived his own life, and, you know, we were in our 20s. He was, you know, approaching his 50s. Mum was in her late 40s. Like, you know, plenty of life there to move on and to do your own thing, and it was clearly not working.
Yep.
I think that's the most sort of frustrating part when you look back at it. You feel like you want to just go back in time and shake him and be like, what are you doing? Like, you're an idiot.
Obviously, my right side of my face is now all titanium plated with an implant on my cheekbone. I've lost my vision in my right eye and my sense of smell, and all my jawline was all smashed in. So I've obviously lost many a teeth.
Simone, too, faced her own new reality that night as the extent of her injuries were discovered by her children and neighbours. The trauma that Simone suffered that night was so severe that immediate action had to be taken by those who attended the scene. Simone was put into an induced coma, and she would later learn of the immediate impact that night would have on her young children.
And he actually told me he had to put me into an induced coma at the scene because any brain injury, and I'm no doctor or no nurse, but your brain swells, and he said I would have been dead. The children were obviously out the front now, and I was wheeled out into the back of the ambulance, and the children always said to me, "Mummy, you look dead in the back of the ambulance."
There was a cruel irony to Simone's injuries that night. The first was the brutality and the force with which the perpetrator hit her may actually have saved her life. And secondly, it would be many months before Simone would actually have any recollection of what was done to her that night.
Receiving so many blows to my skull, the perpetrator actually did me a good gesture by shattering my skull. If I'd only got 5 to 10, I wouldn't be here today because my skull was shattered. My brain was actually able to move with my shattered skull. So that actually did save me. I was obviously ICU, then into a neurosurge ward where I was come around, but apparently I had a sign above my bed. No one was allowed to tell me what had happened because I didn't know my brain injury, etc. And I can remember laying in bed, and obviously I had a nurse right next to me, and I'd said to her, I need to go to the toilet. And she goes, "It's okay, you don't, just do it there, that's okay." And I can remember getting angry with her because I said, "I'm a woman, I need to go to the toilet." But I didn't know my injuries, and obviously I had a catheter and everything in at that stage. And so I had to learn little steps, and it wasn't actually for many months later that I then got moved to a brain rehab unit, and it was about 9:30 at night, and I couldn't sleep because my hospital room I actually thought was my home. And moving rooms really affected me mentally because it was obviously I just thought it was safe. That's where I was safe. But actually moving to another hospital to the brain rehab. And that's where I actually heard the changeover of staff at night, because I was near the front nurse's desk, that I'd actually been assaulted by a baseball bat. I didn't know until then. So that's when, obviously they had to get all the services, psychologists and everything in, because I didn't know what had actually happened to me. And I was learning then each day once I was able to re-walk and different things. And I honestly thought life would be shit. Here I am, half head of hair and couldn't see out of one eye. I didn't know how I was going to manage life, to be honest with you.
Like Simone, Daniel and Luke also had to face the details of the night of their mum's murder head on, as the court case slowly uncovered what led to the tragedy that night.
From the court days, we found out that in the lead up to the night, he had called her like over 100 times within that short little period of time. He would apparently, go to stalk her and go to the shopping centres and bump into her, or, abuse her at the car park, or just where she was working too. So it was like a big build up. And then I think from memory too, they saw footage of him driving up and down the street multiple times. So he definitely would have kept an eye on her.
Listening to Daniel and Luke share their story and tell their mum's experiences, I couldn't help but remember something similar that Simone mentioned to me when she spoke about what she went through.
And I looked at it at lunchtime and I could see that there were a lot of messages, and I didn't open them or reply or anything. So by the time, 5 o'clock came and I jumped on the train to go home, I thought there were hundreds in, and the investigators since told me, yes, there was just so many controlling messages. I don't know any of them because they've obviously had to take my phone for evidence.
There's a lot of things that all of our guests share in common, from stalking to excessive contact and abusive or degrading messages. More often than not, this is something that's common for all victims. It's patterns of behaviour like this that can be so concerning, and it's the ones that we see over and over again. But where does this all begin? After listening to episode 1 of Walk a Mile in Their Shoes, you would have heard our guests talk about the red flags that they noticed in the lead up to tragedy. For Simone, that was jealousy and flowers being sent to the office. For Daniel and Luke, it was the threats and erratic behaviour from their dad. And for Megan, it was the gendered stereotypes and abusive language that was directed at her. Language is one thing that we want to focus on in Walk a Mile in Their Shoes, because it's so often overlooked as a red flag in so many cases. Megan, earlier you mentioned the importance of calling out language and how important words and language is generally when it comes to disrespect and equality and leading with empathy. What does that mean for listeners? What do you mean by leading by example with the words, and what kind of things have you experienced in your career and in your life that you really want listeners to know?
I think a language is such a foundation. I think it's where it all starts, because I feel that it can be a gateway to more serious behaviour if we let language slip through. So I guess I've experienced it twofold as a woman working in sport, probably a little bit more since doing broadcast, and where you might be judged on what you look like, your body, what you're wearing, things that I just wasn't privy to working in print for a long time. And then I guess the way that women's sport and athletes can be spoken about. And sometimes that language is flippant, but I think when it's flippant, it's most damaging.
Megan's final point about language really hit home for me. Language can often be used so flippantly, but it's a gateway to other more damaging behaviours. Now, we're not saying that someone who speaks poorly towards someone is going to go on to become an abuser, let alone a killer. But what we do have to consider is that this side of gender-based harassment and inequality is something that we see on a day-to-day basis, and it could lead to something worse. And that's why everyone wants to stamp this behaviour out before it starts.
one of the lows has certainly been for me being bullied within a workplace. It went on for a few years. It was done by several males, often in unison. And I think at the time I just tried to get through it and get through my work and probably try to ignore it. And it's now sort of 5-6 years after I left that job that I realised how bad it was, how bad it felt, but how bad it was that it wasn't addressed properly, and that warnings didn't really count for anything because that behaviour continued. And at the time I knew the only way it was going to stop was if I left that job, and it turns out that was what put a full stop to it. For me, the bullying was interfering in my work, undermining me and my work, and excluding me in the workplace and within the department. And I was told to rise above it, to be the bigger person, to ignore it. And some of them I hadn't even met. I never met them. And we had different sports departments around the different areas. So in mine, we'd have 3 people. So it might be like 3, 4, 3, 4. And it was right through. But someone would leave and then someone would take, sort of inherit the role. Yeah. But some of them I would never have spoken to in person.
Faceless harassment and bullying. Now you might be listening thinking, well, it doesn't sound that bad, but should someone be forced to put up with that? And should women be forced out of a job that they've been working towards their whole life? Be bullied to the point where they lose passion for something that meant so much to them?
There was a time where something had happened and it felt like the last straw. I remember telling my chief of staff that I thought I might just quit and go and work at Kmart because...
Just give up on your dreams.
Yeah, and that's probably the only time I've considered that, and I'm sure I would have dusted myself off and gone and done something else in the industry. I wouldn't have left the industry, but, I'd been in this job for nearly 10 years and the first probably 5 years were fine. The rest of it wasn't. But that's probably the real time where I thought there was no way out for me.
We've just heard 3 examples of gender-based violence, inequality, and harassment from all ends of the spectrum. And while we empathise with our guests, there might still be one question on your mind. Why didn't they speak up? And why didn't they leave?
One of the things that we hear about is how women like your mum, they're kind of trapped. So what is it that people don't know that you wish they knew about why she couldn't just call the police? Or people will say, well, why didn't she just leave? Like, it's so easy.
Yeah.
And we talked a bit about the threats, or you talked about the threats and stuff, right? Can you tell people a bit more, Luke and Daniel, about why it's so hard for people like your mum?
To be fair, she did call and this is no disrespect to the police, she did call the police a few times. And sometimes obviously they would go to the house and give him a warning or a restraining order or a chat. But yeah, there'll be other times where they wouldn't go because they might be understaffed or they just don't end up going to it because there's other things that are more important to their eyes. So she did call the police, but I think she stuck around for as long as she did is just because she wanted to try and, I guess, make us have a good upbringing in a way of don't affect schooling or studies, and she could be there for us under the same roof. But she did try and get out, and I think more so, if anything, the financial thing definitely played a part in it, as like many mums would, that fear of what's going to happen if I do go, how am I going to support my kids or family or myself even. So yeah, I'm going to let Luke run off this,
I think, for all those reasons. And yeah, it's one of those things where, maybe mum thought it was going to get better. Maybe mum, looked at him and thought there is a good side. That's, something we'll never know. And you know, for everyone that says, you know, oh, just why don't you leave and why don't you do that? It's not that easy. It's not that simple.
Yep.
If it was that simple, you know, it would have been. And I think it just goes to show the fact that when she tried to leave, look what happened.
Yep.
You know, I think that in itself just explains it all. You know, it took her our whole lives to summon the strength to you know, file for divorce and move on when it clearly wasn't working for both of them. And you know, look what ended up happening.
Fear is just one of the reasons victims often feel trapped. At other times, they speak up, but are ignored so often that they stop.
And I think it was just a hassle. Like,
right.
Every time that, and I certainly didn't go to them every time, but because I felt like, you know, it just become, what have they done to Megan now that you just stop going? And it just becomes, another thing we've got to deal with. Like, yeah. Anyway.
And then there are times where the victim doesn't even have a chance to speak up. For Simone, everything happened in just one day. She went from deciding that she was going to break up with him in the morning to fighting for her life by the end of that day.
And we've heard time and time again that often, you know, separation is one of the most dangerous times for a woman. What was that time like for you? Like, it was obviously short because it was like you separated in the same day he came over.
Absolutely, yeah.
But the lead up to that, what went through your head? How did you process that this is the decision that I'm going to take? I'm leaving him.
Yeah. No, well, it was just the build up of the red flags, as I mentioned. And I suppose you know, it might seem really minor, but me ringing my friend and just having her consent, you know, that was like, yeah, that's awesome. You know, she knows what I'm doing. And I did ring her on the way home. I can remember that even on that Monday night before I got off the train. So, you know, she knew exactly, you know, and obviously I'd told her about the Texas and that, but for her to get a phone call then that later on that night, like she would not have even thought what had happened to me would have happened.
Unfortunately, it's not just victims who have to live with the impacts of abuse. These events and gender inequality can have a ripple effect, and sometimes it's difficult for us to know where they'll stop.
And Gabby actually took blame for what had happened to me, not basically because, you know, she didn't let him into her life, you know, didn't go and do anything with him and whatnot. And Ashlyn and Zach, who are now 21 and nearly 20, haven't had a boyfriend or girlfriend in their life. Ashlyn always says to me, "Mummy, will I ever have a boyfriend?" And I said, "Darling, you'll attract the most beautiful guy when, you know, you're not scared," and different things. And with her, obviously, the night of the 25th of September, children had to, after they were taken to the police station and do their statements, because Zach was actually at basketball training this night. So Gabby and Ashlyn were at home, as I said. And at 2 a.m, from them giving their statements, they were actually taken to the hospital by the police because they had to come and say goodbye to me. And that's tough for me because going into the 26th of September, that's actually Ashlyn's birthday. And mentally for her every year, that's a hard thing because she goes, "Mummy, I had to say goodbye to you. You couldn't wish me a happy birthday," you know? So it's not just myself it's affected. It's that ripple effect. It's my children, their mental state and trusting people again, to my family and my friends.
Even like, people think trauma, once mum passes away, that's when the trauma kicks in. I feel like for me, it kicked in years later, many years later, where I really dug myself a hole, and anxiety, depression, had severe insomnia as well too. I was off work, I lost a bunch of weight. I suffered from eczema and psoriasis, so all my, that would sort of all go crazy as well too, and flare up, and you start to have no self-worth, and then you throw in on top of that, what happened to you. It's devastating. And, you're just like, well, I've buried mum, I've got through the court case, but why am I'm trying to pick up the pieces and move on. And, I might look at Daniel and be like, oh, he seems like he's doing a lot better. Why can't I get to that stage yet?
I just always question whether we could have done something more, like speak up more, which is what we want to try and encourage younger kids to do. Speak up if you feel like their parents aren't having a healthy relationship.
Thanks for listening to episode 2 of Carlton Respects Walk a Mile in Their Shoes. On the next episode, we'll talk about hope and the amazing things that our guests are doing and how they've turned their trauma into new beginnings. Beginnings that serve not only to bring awareness to these events in the future and to help the community, but to support them in their healing process. For support, head to 1800respect.org.au. And to learn more about the Carlton Respects initiative, visit carltonrespects.com.au. See you next time.